Well, good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Kizzy Ingalls, University Librarian, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the final Hive seminar in the current series. Today we'll be looking at planning for REF 2021, in particular around planning for publication. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, each of whom will speak for 10 to 15 minutes or so, after which there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion. On my right is Professor Phil Ashworth, who's Director of Research for the College of Life, Health and Physical Sciences at the University of Brighton and a Professor of Physical Geography. Phil has a key role in REF preparations at Brighton, as part of his responsibility for helping lead the research strategy across the university. Externally, he's acted extensively as a grant panel chair for the Natural Environment Research Council and is a council member of the Royal Geographical Society. His own research interests span landscape evolution and sedimentation across a range of scales, including the largest rivers and estuaries in the world, of which topics he's published widely. On my left, Professor Peter Newell, who's Director of Research and Knowledge Exchange for the School of Global Studies here at the University of Sussex and Professor of International Relations. Peter works closely with colleagues throughout global studies to maximise the school's research performance and has played a key part in developing processes that help academic colleagues to plan their research publications in a REF-informed but not REF-driven manner. Peter's own research focuses on issues of environment and development, especially climate change. He has conducted research and policy work for the governments of the UK, Sweden and Finland, as well as international organisations such as the United Nations Development Programme. He has published extensively and has a number of editorial roles for leading journals in the field of environmental governance and policy. So, Phil, over to you.
Okay, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to stand up because I don't get much chance for a desk-bound job. So, first of all, thanks for inviting me here. I'm from the University of Brighton, that's a poor place down the road. And we have a very different type of university at Brighton. Of course, we share some commonalities in the medical school, for example, which is a joint Sussex-Brighton venture. But we'll see, and I hope the discussion will take us to some quite different areas, some of the issues that are at the heart of challenges in Sussex that also might be challenges for us in Brighton. I just want to say before we started, what I'm going to be talking about are my personal thoughts on my experience at Brighton and in the external environment. If you're going to quote anything I say on social media in particular, please do so. And I'm on Twitter at Rio Paranar if you're interested. But please do it accurately. Otherwise, I shall read your tweets and come back to you. Okay. Fine. Thank you. I'm kicking off. I wasn't sure who was going to kick off, so I'll start. And we haven't consulted. We've just had a brief conversation. We're going to talk about very similar topics, as it turns out. But if we overlap, I'm sure you'll adjust as we go. I've got one general comment and then 5 observations I want to talk about planning to publish for the REF. First thing is I want to just put it in context about Brighton, because not everybody knows about University of Brighton and how big and what we do compared to Sussex. Just to give you an idea of the last REF, the REF 14 that we went into, we submitted 210 staff from Brighton. That is only 21% of our staff. So it's a small, selective submission. You put in 73% of your staff. I don't have the numbers. Was it 500 about, something like that? Something close to 500. It's almost double. Certainly. So you put in most of your staff. We only put in certain staff from Brighton. Okay. We put into 10 units of assessment. If people are familiar with the REF jargon, these are topics, disciplines, units of assessment, focus of research. We put into 10 different areas. Of course, in Sussex, you put into 24. So you have a very much broader discipline base and expertise than us. So it's quite focused. We came 58th in the great grand table that ranks people by their average score, what's called the GPA, the grade point average. He came 58th in the sector, which was almost exactly the same as we did in the previous ref. And I'm not sure where Sussex is. Sussex, I'm going to look it up. Do they come 40th in GPA?
40th.
Yeah, I think it was 40th, yeah. Okay, so just so you know where we are. We were quite pleased, but we always wanted to do better. But the critical thing about Brighton is that we came very low in what you call research intensity or power, because of the volume multiplied by the quality. Because we didn't have the same volume of staff going in, we slid down the tables. Final point about Brighton, so you know, we had, as an institution of what we put in on the outputs, we had 14% were 4-star and 44% were 3-star. And I'm hoping, and I'm presuming people in the room here know the definitions of 4 stars and 3 stars in this jargon terminology. World leading is 4-star, 3-star is internationally excellent outputs. So we were below the sector in those figures, I should say, but that was a pretty reasonable result for us. Okay, that's Brighton, and I'm sure you'll hear more about Sussex and you're familiar with it. 5 observations I wanted to spark off the debate, if I could. The first thing is, and again I'm assuming some of you have done some of the reading about the preparations and the consultations about the next ref, the ref 2021. Now, one of the critical things for Brighton, and I'm sure you'll hear this from Sussex, is about the inclusion of staff. And it's about whether all staff will be included, but it's also about how many publications, how many outputs, I should say, not publications, how many outputs are going to have to be associated with those staff. There is a debate, I hope you're aware of, about whether there's going to be a minimum number of outputs associated with any member of staff that goes in. As you should know, the word on the street is that all staff will need to go in. How you define all and how you define research active staff is still to be debated. But let's assume most of the staff are going to go in and have to put something in. Then the question is, what's the minimum? Should it be 0 or should it be 1? And then also the maximum. At the moment, it seems like the sector's fairly agreed that it might be 6. The maximum 6 number of outputs are tagged to each member of staff, with an average maybe of 2. I'm hoping you all know that. But what's the challenge for us is how we do that in Brighton, where we've got some staff who are not such high achievers. And the policy at the moment is twofold. One is that we're working very hard with what we call informally call the high achievers, stars, call them what you want, who can get 6 papers that are 3 and 4 star. Don't forget 1 and 2 star outputs don't count as such. They don't bring any money in through the QR allocation that people get off government. So we're working on the high achievers to make sure they have 6 so that they can help ease the burden on those who are struggling with 1 or 2. And we're looking quite hard at multi-authorship, which might intrigue some people, particularly early career researchers who are in the room, on how that can benefit us as an institution. We're looking at it strategically. Or obviously you can't put anybody on a paper who's had nothing to do with it, but attractive though that might be. It strategically can make sense to have people tagged to certain papers. Now we're also, as part of that, we're looking, you might notice a number of journals now actually insist on you saying in the acknowledgement section, insist on you attributing the different percentage of contribution from different people to different parts, to the study and design, the conception, the writing, the analysis. And we're looking at pushing that out across our university. So we're quite clear who's contributing what to multi-author papers, and then strategically thinking about how we need to shape that in the next few years. So multi-author papers, quite a big deal for us. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second point was we are looking hard, as you might expect, and I'm sure every university is doing this, at converting 3-star to 4-star outputs. Again, I'm not sure what everybody knows in the room, but the current rule is that 4-star output attracts 4 times more funding than a 3-star. That's the ramp, that's the funding ramp between 3 and 4. So quite obviously, if you can get a 4-star output, it's going to bring more money and more prestige for the university. So how do you make that conversion? Now you notice I haven't even talked about 1 and 2 stars and how you get them up to 3 and 4 stars. That's another challenge. But we're particularly concerned about moving from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. And we are being quite proactive in that. You could say that can come through mentorship, which is a very good way of doing things, of course. But we've created a fund very recently that's funded through QR funds, actually, from what we won last time, that will fund extra experiments if you're a scientist, and some of the reviews coming back in your paper say very good, but it's missing this critical piece of last analysis that needs to be done. And that happens a lot actually in the hard sciences for us. We're also looking at sending papers out to external review before they're actually submitted. So paying people to do an external review for us, critical friends maybe, before we submit it. And we're also looking at referees' comments when papers come back. So we've set up panels to look at referees' comments. So you've submitted the paper, it comes back, says, probably going to accept this, it looks good, but here are all the various things that I think you've got to work on. Well, it's how to use that information to actually launch it into a 4-star, what might be a 4-star category. So that's number 2, converting 3 to 4 stars. The third one might not affect anybody in this room, so I apologise, but I'll tell you anyhow. And it's to do with how we deal with the arts and humanities. So it's a big deal for us, and it's a big deal for you as well, but our art and design colleagues, in particular, and architecture, were a major part of our submission from Brighton and did quite well. What happened in the last rep is you had to have a tagged some outputs had to have a tagged digital portfolio. So if you had some output that was not a physical paper, so it was a performance, a dance, a sculpture, an exhibition of photography, then how would you submit that to the rep? It's quite challenging. Well, what they said last time is you can submit the artifacts in a big warehouse in Bristol, but you can also produce a digital portfolio to support that. And that, between you and me, is a glorified PowerPoint. It's much more than that, believe me. But let's think of it as something that describes the process, the evolution of the ideas, and what's been done. Anyway, that is very difficult to do. We put in about 35 digital portfolios last time, and it was very challenging for us. The amount of time and professionalism that you had to put into that was incredible. We did it all in-house. I'm not sure whether we'd do that again. We might look to subcontract some of that work next time. But I just post that there, even if it doesn't affect everybody in this room. It's such a challenge for us for outputs, notice, artifacts and outputs. Fourth point is about encouraging and stimulating open access. I'm sure that will go down well here in the library. But beyond, obviously, the current HEFKey commitments that you have to have it in an open access domain, such as your local repository. We are, like everybody, trying to stimulate more open access. Now, we've done a bit of work, I'm sure you would concur with this, to show that if you fund gold open access, pay an APC, pay a charge, it reaches further and a larger volume. Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I know. We've actually tested this, and it's incredible how much further that reach does go. And at the end, so what we've done is we've created a fund at Brighton that will fund gold APCs, not all of them. We have to make a decision on what's appropriate, that are non-RC UK based. Now, you may know that if you've got work that was funded by the research councils, your university has a block grant of HEFKey to help with APCs, to help you do gold access. If you're non-RC UK funded research, and a lot at Brighton is non-research council funded research, then we've created a fund, an alternative fund, that might be able to promote and pay for these charges, which typically between £1,000 and £2,000 each. And we've also been looking at citations, how to gain more citations. Now you might say, well, what's that got to do with it? But of course, some panels, not all the panels, some of the panels insisted on you either putting the citations, I think it was, when you put the submission in, or they looked at Scopus, etc., to put the citations next door to it. Only certain panels, and who knows how that's going to go forward. There's bit of a backlash against the metrics, the metric tide, which was of course written by an author from here that was here. But citations are a big deal for, we think could be interesting. I mean, I don't even want to go on, and I do not agree. Let's be clear, citations are not a measure of quality of paper. Either the impact factor of the journal or the number of citations got does not necessarily tell you the quality of the paper. Let's be absolutely sure on that. But we can do things, and we've heard from panel members that if you publish more with international authors, they tend to, obviously it may be, you tend to get more citations, particularly in North America. So if you have research and you have a colleague in North America who's been tangential to that research, it's worth including them in the authorship and getting them part of it. It's also worth trying to get your citations early. Now it's obvious again when you're on the panel, if you see something published in 2020, it's hardly going to have any citations. But it really does impress on the panel if you can get your paper in. Some of it's already gone by, but 2016, 17, 18, and start accumulating citations now, it could help us. And the final point on that one is we're working hard on the ORCID identifier, which of course is probably going to be a compulsory in the next ref, but we're looking at not just getting your ORCID identifier, which I presume everyone has here. Is it a policy here at the university?
It's not a policy, but we have access to it.
Okay, it's a policy at the University of Brighton that everybody should have an ORCID identifier. It's almost certain that anybody wants to going into the ref will have to have an ORCID identifier, staff identifier. You just register, it's free, it's dead easy to do. But the trick is to get a profile with it. Any old fool can, and in fact if you look at me, I am any old fool, can get an ORCID identifier, but I've not populated my profile yet. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure the profile matches so that people can look at the quality of our research. Last point, very quick one, is we're working hard to provide the environment for our research staff and postdocs to become independent researchers. Now, that is important to us strategically because it increases our volume, and volume is an issue at Brighton. So it involves, again, I hope you know that the last ref at least, and there's a debate about how we define an independent researcher, but if you could make the case you're an independent researcher, if you're on the research staff, you can go into the rep. Your work is not independent, it's tied to somebody else, then you weren't allowed in the rep. But there are possibly ways in which we can stimulate independent researchers. And one of the ways, quite obviously, but doesn't get you all the way, is to make sure postdocs are recognised and possibly first authors on papers, as probably they should be anyhow. They do the work half the time. But to get the researchers' names up there, up front. But what we've been proactive about at Brighton is providing time for research staff to start working as independent researchers. So that means people who are on contracts actually releasing them from those contracts for 10% of their time or more. Okay, so we have a sabbatical scheme that's funded centrally, that out of QR, that research staff can apply to. It's not just academic staff. Postdocs, research assistants can apply to it, and they may say, look, I am a postdoc on a 3-year grant. It's full time. That's what I work for my supervisor full time. But we say no. We'll talk to the supervisor. They'll give you 2 months off or 10% of your contract time off. If it works, it doesn't always work. Stretching your contract out for that project with your supervisor and giving you adequate time to try and develop an independent research profile. And we think that's really important. We hear from our research staff and ECRs that it's very challenging to get that time to develop into an independent researcher. And frankly, the university, it's a win-win for the careers, for the career development for researchers, and the university gets more volume. So I've got some others, but I'll pause there if I can. So are we going to go each and then we'll have questions?
Yeah, we'll do the speaking and then we'll do questions at the end. So Peter,
That's
over to
great.
you.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll sit because I've been chasing children around the house this morning. So I'm quite pleased to be sat down for a minute. So if that's all right with you, I'll stay sat. Thanks, Kitty, and thanks, Dom, for the invitation. I'm not Gordon Harold. I hope that's not too disappointing. Those of you that came to see him, you've got me instead. So I'm Director of Research in Global Studies. I've been for the last 3 years, and so responsible for trying to develop our REF strategy around research environment, around publications, around impact, and trying to put various things in place to ensure that we maximise the strength of our return. I guess my opening gambit in all of this and sort of reflection in a way is to try and think about REF as being just one driver of people's publication strategies. It causes a lot of anguish, anxiety, stress, as we know, and there are lots of reasons or things that people have to have in mind when they're developing their research strategy. And I don't know which schools you're from, most of you, or some of you at least, will be familiar with personal research plans that people are being asked to do and update every year, right, where you lay out across all of your research activities, grants, impact, publications, what we're doing, what you've published already, what your plans are for publications. And in that, you normally will have a conversation with your director of research or one of the research leads and possibly your head of department around your research strategy, but it will also be informed by other things around impact, publications you might want to get out which won't be 3 or 4 star necessarily, but you will need them for an underpinning case study. There'll also be considerations, of course, around promotions, right? And not all of these things go together, because some of the things I'll say later on about timing and sequencing and making sure that you're REF ready aren't always consistent with what might be best in terms of your career progression. So you might want to publish a book because that's the thing that will get you to the next level. That may not be the first choice thing to do in terms of making sure you're REF ready in the near term. So I'm just saying there's trade-offs and tensions there. And we need to think about REF preparations in that bigger context of the variety of reasons that people need to develop publication strategies of one sort or another. The message we try to send out to people, given this context of concern and anguish and what REF is doing to the nature of academic work, is that in a way it's trying to reward things which we should aspire to anyway. Most of us want to do world-leading, internationally recognised, excellent, original work of one sort or another. And so it's a game, it's a series of hoops that we have to jump through in order to show that to an external audience. And the more you realise that, the sort of more manageable and less threatening to some extent that it becomes. And that's not to say that it doesn't have some of the distorting effects, which potentially it does. Where you get the rankings of key journals. And I know some schools are hotter on this about making sure you only publish in the top 5 or 10 of the ranked journals. And the problem is that sort of reinforces the power of the gatekeepers, the editors that run those journals and their ideas of what the discipline is, what counts as originality, what counts as significance. So there's a potential for sort of shrinking and potentially interdisciplinary work suffers in those sorts of contexts. So there are these genuine concerns about what the REF does to the ways in which we work and the sort of forms of inquiry that people engage in. At the same time, I think it's a strategic game we have to play. We have no choice, and it's worth keeping that in mind as well. So a little bit echoing what Phil was saying, a lot of our advice is about plan early, partly around the citations point that you picked up on, and to do it strategically. I think planning early also in terms of trying to target some of those bigger, harder to access journals early on, so that if you're not successful, there's still time in the cycle to rework that paper and send it off to another journal. But aim high early on, try and benefit from all the support and the mentoring that you were talking about, which I'll refer to a bit later on. Make the most of that, and then there's still time to go for a lower ranked journal if necessary as the sort of cycle moves on. Again, a little bit echoing what Phil was saying, we do have to pay attention to impact factors and journal rankings because they are an unfortunate proxy for quality. As you say, they're not necessarily related to quality. And again, there's a role here for the chairs of panels, right? There's the steer that they give to panel members about how far to take those things into account. Some have given a very strong steer, so I was part of a development study submission previously. And the steer from that chair was very much you just judge the output on the basis of its quality, irrespective of where it's published. So it could be in world development, could be in the Ghanaian review of African political economy, some lesser ranked journal. It doesn't matter. It's about the quality of the work and whether it's original, significant, etc. that's the only thing that should be taken to mind. But the reality is, given the number of papers that people sat on panels have to look at and the small amounts of time they have to make judgments on these, it will be something they might be tempted to fall back on because it might not be their primary area of expertise. And if it's published in a high-ranked journal, and therefore the assumption is it's been reviewed by at least 2 or 3 people who all think it's original, significant, and rigorous, then you might be tempted to give it a sort of a 3 or a 4. So it's worth keeping those things in mind as we give people advice about where to publish and when. Again, about planning and sequencing and realistic deadlines. We ran into problems as a school last time with lots of people, partly for career reasons, partly also because it's what they're working on. They wanted to complete a big, ambitious book project. So again, this is perhaps a discipline-specific issue. It might apply less to some parts of geography, but certainly international relations, to some extent anthropology, departments that I cover, it was an issue. And some people will embark on this project. This is going to be an amazing 4-star output, and it's been the whole cycle trying to deliver on that, don't quite get there, and then they're in trouble basically. So there's an argument for making sure you go for, get a few high-quality journal articles out earlier in the cycle, then sort of invest heavily in your book, and if you don't get to complete that by the end of the cycle, you can use it in the next cycle. So it's having these sorts of conversations with colleagues about this is a great project, it's really interesting, it's really important to you, but let's think about the sequencing of your outputs. Because of this sense of stress and pressure that people feel, why not take the pressure off by getting a few items in the bag earlier on in the cycle, and then you're free to pursue more ambitious projects or to go for publications which serve other purposes around impact or trying to reach audiences that wouldn't necessarily be reached by some of the elite journals that you have to publish in for ref reasons. So we're all publishing for lots of reasons, for lots of different audiences all of the time. So early in the cycle, play the ref game, and then if you've got time, you can publish what you like, where you like, for whom you like. Is sort of the advice we try to put out. Related to that then, and I think this is particularly an issue sometimes for junior colleagues, is to resist that pressure or the temptation to publish really good material that you might have coming out of your PhD or from postdocs in book chapters or in yearbooks and these sorts of things, which are unlikely to be ranked as sort of 4-star or often even 3-star outputs. You know how it is as more junior researchers. There's often, your former supervisor is doing an editor collection, they'd like you to have a chapter in it. You're going to conferences and networking, and people are looking for outputs, and they might put a certain amount of pressure on them to publish in those outlets, and it's very tempting. And it's probably easier to publish in those outlets than going through a journal review process where you wait a long time, an uncertain outcome, etc. But there is something like trying to save some of your best work for the key publications and only thinking about those other outlets later on in the process. It's a difficult challenge, I think, as in a role as research manager, because you're not wanting to tell people what to publish or where to publish, but you are saying, you're going to have a more stressful time if you spend the first part of the ref cycle producing book chapters, many of which you probably won't be able to submit. In our instance, in the latter part of this, as we get to the ref deadline, you're going to be really stressed trying to get these papers into top journals, less likely to get cited, etc., or your citation index will be weaker, etc. And we have these discussions, quite lively discussions often within our school about this, but you can also look at the last ref exercise to see which outputs attracted what sorts of grades, right? In terms of book chapters on the whole, in our discipline, for example, only 14% of them attracted 3 or 4 stars. So you can actually give those statistics to colleagues so they're clear about the risks they're taking by choosing certain publication avenues over others. And so to come back to the sort of mentoring and support point, because I think that's the important thing here, is giving people useful, meaningful advice. We have, as was mentioned before, these personal research plans. I think that's a key moment. So those are sort of live, or in our school at least, they're live documents. You just update them each year with outputs, things you're working on, grants, etc. So having that as an active conversation about where you're at. Trying to use research centres or sometimes department seminars as spaces where people can bring ideas for outlines, share abstracts of papers, and it's often useful for getting people's feedback about how you might rewrite the abstract in ways that highlight the originality, the significance, the rigour. Are you pushing home the key messages about why this is a 4-star paper early on in the paper and getting feedback from a variety of people about that. So that sort of hands-on mentoring and sharing of papers, I think, is really useful. And it's clear, I think this has already been said, the ref game has shifted slightly. I guess when many of us were growing up in this environment, it was about publish or perish, and there was a sort of emphasis on quantity. It's like how long could your CV and your publication list be? That's not the game now. It really is about quality over quantity, and that does require a bit of a cultural shift, I think, for a lot of us, and it does force us to think far more strategically and about these sorts of issues about timing and sequencing and prioritisation. And I think what we're trying to do, and our university, I don't know whether Brighton has done this, we've had a research quality review where we've been sending material out to external research advisors, critical friends in old language, and getting their feedback. And I think for us it's part of a way of trying to validate, to confirm our own assessments of our work. So people are doing our own self-rankings of what you think the paper, what criteria it fulfills, whether it's hopefully 3 or 4. Then some internal reviewing of that amongst colleagues on research committees, and then sending those items off. And I think going forward, the clear message is to just try and target those items which we're hoping are 4, but could be borderline 3 or 4. That's where the game is. But over time, hopefully, that we have our own internalised sense of what those, of whether we're meeting those criteria and what the 4-star outputs look like, rather than having to rely on external advisors for that. So that's a little bit about my sort of reflections and the experience in the school that I work for at the moment.
Thank you very much. Any initial questions or comments, observations?
It's a good job Ian's just walked in. I was trying to think. I was just thinking what the name is, but there's a initiative going around at the moment. Is it called something like Responsible Metrics Initiative or something? It's apparently using impact factors as a judge of quality of papers, and they're asking universities to sign up to this.
I'll take that as an opportunity to sit down.
No, you're taking it as an opportunity to stand up. Isn't that true?
Yeah, Responsible Metrics is a working group that's been set up as a consequence of the rising tide review of metrics, involving a range of bodies, funding bodies, research councils, I think are in there, UK, and so on. They haven't had that many public pronouncements, but they did make a submission into the recently closed consultation on the ref, which is public. I think the UK has it on their website.
But don't they want universities to sign up? I thought they were canvassing for universities to sign up to say that they believe in this.
Maybe you're thinking of something slightly different. I'm trying to remember this.
Good chart.
There's. So Pete's just mentioned the declaration on research assessment, DORA, San Francisco declaration, to which the university has signed up. We were the first UK university to sign up.
That's the one.
And then there's the Leiden principles, which some people like more because they say they're slightly more broadly defined and nuanced. And numbers of institutions signed up. I'm feeling you might be right, there's something else that has come out more recently to which we can subscribe if we wish.
But then some other UEAs, as you said, I don't know what the title of it is, but business studies or very much, they use a prescribed version of this is a 4-star journal, this is a 3-star journal, don't they? Maybe some other UEAs do too. So
there's the ABS ranking.
Yeah, the ABS ranking. That's it. Yeah, that's right.
The disciplines do. The panels say they don't.
Really?
You believe what?
We were just commenting that in reality, given the volume of papers that people have to look at on panels, they have to use it as a default proxy for quality when in doubt. I think this is what I've heard. I know that the chair's message is always just judge the paper on its own merits in respect of where it's published.
We know that some nature papers were ranked as unclassified or 1-star. Fortunately, not ours as far as we know. We know that happened.
Yes,
So I have an early career kind of question. I was at King's in London, and now I'm here on a 10-month contract, and I'm in the arts and humanities. I'm running a conference at King's, which came out at the tail end of something I was doing there, and it's got quite high impact because of the connection with Jane Austen on money. So what I'm interested in is, well, how do you record that, and also to what extent do you carry that with you? Because obviously it's coming under the auspices of King's, it's funded through King's, but I'm now at Sussex and I'll probably have to go somewhere else after that. And I know there's a sort of conversation around what do you get to take with you, who gets to claim ownership of it, and also, I suppose, next to that, how do you record outputs that are like that, which is an international conference, which also has high impact because of the way we've marketed it. So sorry, that's a lot of questions in one.
Well, it's quite a common problem in the arts, isn't it? I mean, it's exhibitions, a classic example that we come across. How do you evidence their impact, actually? These arguments come a little bit more under impact. But we've been, I presume you do the same, but we've been systematically recording how many people attend these events for a start, to give us some evidence. And I think you have to do it as part of your, get the right acronym, HEPSCI return, the one with
HEPCI.
Thank you. Yeah, that one. You have to put in the number of people who have been attending these research events. So that's what, so formally, we try and count the metrics in that respect. We've also, when we have exhibitions, or conference, it could be conferences too, but strangely enough, when we get feedback, comment box afterwards, it's maybe some evidence that we might want to use in future impact case studies, possibly. But we're given that opportunity to at least gather that evidence. The situation is, isn't it, that I mean, basically, obviously, you would go into a future ref in the place where you're at the time of the census date. Who knows where that might be here still if you're lucky. But I would have thought the situation that you just described, that most of the credit for that would be taken by King's. It's where the research or the event, the conference event, was. Not knowing the full details of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and if the research underpinning it was done at King's and funded by King's.
Yeah, well, it's going into a new project, so that's why it's a bit complicated. So
it's not quite in the portability argument domain, really, as such. It's not saying it's outputs. So I think wherever you are in the future, at the census date, I think you'd struggle to be able to take credit with all that directly with you. I'd say.
But don't say that in your job interview.
Build a conference here. That's what it's the problem. It's difficult.
Ian, do you want to add anything about the whole portability issue?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me. I'll stand up or at least turn around. I think your question's a really interesting one, because whilst Phil said that sounds like impact, and I don't disagree with him, there's definite elements of outputs in there as well. And from the outputs point of view, the answer is we really don't know at the moment, because the rules haven't been decided. It's one of the fundamental questions as to portability or not. But it's more than just portability or not, because you have moved and different bits of what you've done have been done in different places. So then this, I think, also applies in the impact context, that on the submission date in 2021, impact could have derived from a range of things that have happened over a 20-year period, which could have happened either through one person being in lots of different places or lots of different people being in different places. And so all of those places have a claim on part of the impact that's arisen. So rather than it just being about centred around Phil, it could be Phil and me, and so both institutions could, although he could put in a lot more because I don't do any research, but both institutions would have a claim, but have to demonstrate what the contributing research was. So if it had been centred on you but in different places, you'd effectively have to dissect yourself, or your previous institutions would be dissecting yourself in order to try to understand what you had done within that institutional context, which is really difficult. I mean, that's what applied last time to impact, and we don't expect anything different. And there's now suggestions around non-portability for outputs, and so the same type of question arises, especially with portfolio outputs. All of this has been driven with a mindset of journal articles, but long-form monographs take a long time to produce, but portfolios are even more problematic, I think.
And it's also difficult because with the climate of Brexit, trying to find permanent posts in arts and humanities are almost impossible.
Yes.
And so I'm knocking out all the recently graduated PhDs from 1 and 2 year contracts whilst I'm going up for permanent posts against senior academics and not getting them. So I'm inevitably going to be travelling for the next 2 to 5 years, depending on what happens.
Yeah. The other sort of aspect it raises for me, I should say I'm in favour of non-portability. I think as a principle it's the right thing to do. Your question has illustrated the difficulties around practicalities of it, to make it operational, and that's the main question in the consultation, really. The reason that I and others are in favour of non-portability is this false market, or we're commoditising you and others like you and saying, people just said, don't say that at interview. So you're trading on, I happen to have today a really good output, one I think and you think will be 4-star, therefore I like you, I might recruit you. If you had a decent portfolio of 2-star outputs, which may be completely right for your stage of career, I'm suddenly not interested in you. And that doesn't seem to be right. We should be recruiting you for what you have achieved and what you can achieve in the future, rather than trading you with, as you come with a dowry. That's not right. I'm using that sort of pejorative there. That is not right. It's the sector's attitude and culture has to change. When I said this in a group of people like me from across the UK, someone said, well, that's quite tough, that's going to take a long time. So perhaps that's the case, but we've got to start sometime, rather than thinking, okay, it's a 10, 15-year job to change everybody's attitude, but you don't try to start somewhere. When are you going to start? So it's a really good question, because it illustrates so many different aspects, not just of the ref, but of the broader environment, culture we're in.
Other questions, please.
So there's an issue around if you're working in a disciplinary sense, and that you may have journal articles that are more appropriate for one discipline ref panel than another. And has Sussex looked at that issue at all, about whether people in one department could submit to another department's ref?
Yes, I think we're like in our case, for example, we're having conversations with people in SPRU, and there's a lot of people there working on energy, sustainability issues, which some of the people in geography work in. And just as we were saying, BMEC and others have their rankings of business and management journals, which don't apply to a lot of colleagues in SPRU, for example. We're publishing excellent research, lots of impacts, bringing lots of research income, but probably wouldn't target those sorts of journals. And so there are conversations like that, and I know those are going on across the university about where outputs will be submitted. Likewise with IDS, obviously, as well, right on our doorstep here. So for those of us working around international development. In a sort of concrete sense, on the back of what I was saying about research quality review, one thing we've been doing now is to try and get critical friends working in international development, because one thing we found is that outputs that were more interdisciplinary on the whole were ranked lower by former panel members of geography, international relations and anthropology in our case. So we've now found, or in the process of finding someone that we can send international development, sort of more interdisciplinary work to triangulate, really, to see if we get different scores, different outcomes. So on lots of levels, in terms of how we're getting this reviewed, how we're making sure colleagues get a fair hearing, we're doing it, but also strategically in the run-up to REF, thinking about who might be submitted, or which outputs, because it's not about the people, right? It's about the outputs, which outputs would go into which submission.
Could you potentially split? Well, I know the rules haven't been published yet, but whether you could split outputs between
You can't do split.
Okay, so you
in
have
the
to, you have to
tax
commit
rules, at least.
to one panel or another panel.
You have to, your outputs are tagged to you, and you have to be associated with one URL. That was in the previous rules. You cannot split. But the intriguing point is that if you're multi-author on a paper, as I had at the last ref, and I submitted the paper as an author to Earth Sciences B7, my colleague submitted it to Geography C17, the same paper. And I don't know you can't tag exactly what your output got, but I was told two panel members basically did better in geography than they did in sciences. So it's interesting how the same output can get a better deal, possibly, or be a bit better in different panels. But you yourself, you can't split at the moment, won't be able to split your outputs. So that'd be a strategic decision for the university.
Although you can request a particular output is cross-referred to another panel. So if you've got 4 outputs, 3 of which are solid in the area that it's been submitted to, and the 4th one you can ask for that one to go to somewhere else. In previous times, it's up to the panel whether they agree or not. Whereas I think that might be
they still don't have to agree to your request, though, do they?
No, not in the last.
To make a request this time, but they still could overturn it. Any more?
Other questions? I was wondering whether you've got any ideas about how we can break the link between journal impact factors and perceived quality. I mean, I think because it's so tied in with academic career progression. What can we do? We start to do to perhaps.
Well, I mean, you've already mentioned about your research quality exercise and review process you do here. I mean, we're slightly different, or at different stages as to the 2 universities, as Ian knows, in that at Brighton we have a very, might even say, micromanaged environment where all outputs at the moment that have been produced by anybody every year are reviewed internally by 2 independent people and given a grade, and then can be reviewed by a 3rd person, and a grade is recorded for that. At Sussex, you're mixed halfway through, I understand it. Some departments have done that, or even some parts of the departments have. Some other departments haven't. They've gone for self-evaluation of their outputs. Is that my misquoting anybody?
All of them are supposed to have gone through a process of review. Not everybody has completed the process
yes.
yet. They're taking slightly different approaches, including use of external.
Yeah, but my point is that I think that helps break that tie to the impact factor. If you get people to read them and grade them themselves, with the understanding that you should not forget the impact factor, read the quality of the paper, the significance, the originality, the vigour of the paper, then that does go part of the way to it. Because otherwise, if you depend on or if you're using self-evaluation, you are tempted, I think, more to look at impact factors. The interesting thing for me, just one further point from that, is about what's in the pipeline. So we at Brighton only look at stuff that's out. We only evaluate stuff that's published, not what's coming as in press or as promised. I know at Sussex you do look at the pipeline, and I think that's an interesting discussion about how that process works and how useful that can be. I think it's quite useful to do a self-evaluation of pipeline, and we don't do that.
I think it's useful to evaluate papers that are in draft and you haven't yet decided where to send them, and get those reviewed by colleagues too, because you may, and again, sometimes more junior colleagues think, well, I'll play it safe and go for this journal, and you have other colleagues think, this is fantastic, this is potentially world leading, why not go for this more ambitious journal? So getting feedback at that stage. But if you are going to do that, then think really carefully about originality, significance, regular pitch, what else has been published in that journal. Make sure you're giving that paper the very best chance. So some review at that stage is very useful, I think. But I think I would come back to the other thing I was saying, that people publish for numerous reasons. What I was trying to say, or what we try to say to colleagues, is play the ref game early on. And then if you're confident you've got a series of, hopefully 4-star pieces in the bag, then publish for all sorts of reasons, which have nothing to do with impact factors. It might be about, particularly in development or other areas where you're consciously trying to target audiences and people that won't read journals they can't afford to or have access to them or whatever. You're publishing for lots of different reasons and audiences, and it's important to keep hold of that. But there's a stress management strategy. Get the ref off your back early on in the cycle, and then publish what you like. Would be my advice.
But that goes back to my point I was making earlier about the experience as a staff have to shoulder the burden of getting try to get to 6 really good publications. So it takes the stress of developing researchers who might be struggling more and just getting 1, 2 or 3.
Well, sometimes those early career researchers are the ones that got the best material.
Oh,
straight out of PhD.
I know, absolutely.
And the senior ones that do big admin roles, like being research director.
This excuse already.
I'd love to, obviously.
Can I just throw in a non-ref anecdote in this sort of context just to illustrate how deeply embedded this is, and it doesn't use the word impact factor, but a couple of months ago we were reviewing one of our substantive research programs, and it seemed to be going really well, and I asked the question, so what are the research achievements? Because much of what the previous discussion in the meeting had been about sort of administrative logistics of the operation of the group and so on, and how successful they've been. So I said, what are your research achievements, which is mainly on things? And the answer came back, we had a paper in Nature, we had a paper in Science. And so I said, that sounds great, what was the content? I wasn't asking where you published, I said, what was the content?
Yeah.
And it took them back, and they really struggled to answer the question, which worried me a little bit. Don't you know what research you're doing and what you're proud of, what are the achievements you've made to your field, regardless of where it's published? But it just demonstrates how embedded it is.
Absolutely. Question here.
Yeah, just in terms of impact, and it's one's probably quite basic, ways are quite basic. But just, I'm in media, film, and music, so I make art installation, and I'm interested in when you mention impact and conferences when they're quite big ones, but then it's academic audience mostly, so it's not public. Its impact has to be public, is that right? Or did I get that wrong?
Well, that was the rules under the last rep, effectively. But as you may know, as part of the consultation, they're looking at whether they want to broaden the definition of impact to include academic. I don't know what the words are, but academic reach.
It has to be broader. It has to be outside higher education. So I don't think they've modified that bit so much.
Right, okay.
The wording in the consultation was agreed to be rather clumsy in this particular case, and that the framework is, my reading, it can be very similar to last time. So if you make a difference to the way that you teach in your subject in your institution, that doesn't count. If you make a difference in the way that the whole sector teaches in your subject, that makes a difference, and so that's countable. But if it's contribution to expansion of knowledge within your discipline, that's what the output section is for, and you can talk about it in the environment. Impact.
That addressed my second question, which is impact with education, because that's changed this year, this new rep, isn't it?
In 2014.
Yeah.
Can I just say, it was an interesting point that Pete made to me separately earlier on, but he was saying some people have been looking, in Sussex, have been looking at trying to pull out the significance, originality and rigour of their publications. We don't do that at Brighton. It was a good idea, I'm thinking about that. So I, as part of, so presumably once it's published, well no, presumably before it's published, you do this. Yeah, but when you think you're at a final draft, it's a good time to think, what is the significance? 3 lines, what is the significance? What's the original? What's the original? If it's not obvious, and you can't even pull it out, then we're all in trouble in some ways, and I like that idea.
That originated for us in physics and astronomy, surprisingly.
Right.
So quite a directive approach, and drawn from previous panels' activity of marking on a 12-point scale, so 4 points for each of those. What also interested me was that they observed that in reviewing the paper in the way you just described, look at just the abstract, and does the abstract tell you why it hits those 3?
Yeah.
Because it's important not just in a ref context, but in access to the article. So people think, yes, I want to read that, I might cite it.
Yeah, we were saying earlier about mentoring around research cafes and using centres to try and do that. It's hugely important.
We've both been talking about career advice to individuals around prioritising the publications plan, but of course the vast majority of researchers, although not all, but the vast majority will also be doing teaching roles as well alongside this. Does it make it easier or more difficult to advise someone when they may be stronger on teaching than on research, or vice versa? how does that affect the kinds of advice you would give to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are judgments to be made, particularly given everything we've said about the drive towards quality and 4-star and so on. If there are people who are carrying heavy teaching loads or are less research active, haven't got grants, there's a whole series of reasons why people might be less research active at a particular time. There is a question about how much mentoring and so on. If there are reasons. Well, let me take this out of this context now. When I used to be a research director at UWE, I had some power for people who'd say, I can't publish this because I've got too much teaching on my marking loads, to try and reduce those things, to free up blockages that people were saying were preventing them from publishing things. Sometimes it is around mentoring. But others are more happy with the fact they're not aspiring to be world-leading publishers and publish in the very best places. They see themselves more as teachers, and people are, that's more where the balance lies in terms of their overall portfolio, and we need people like that as well. So I think it's getting that, understanding that mix and understanding where people are coming from, and supporting those people who you think can be sort of taken to the next level. If some people are comfortable with that and they're not particularly ambitious about wanting to go to a high level and they're carrying heavy teaching loads or admin loads and do numerous other things for the school, then it may not be worth your while trying to sort of drive those people on to be your sort of, the people that are within the 4-star papers. So I think it's trying to understanding where people are coming from, what's preventing them from getting to that next level. Is it just about time, or is it? What we're finding a lot doing workshops around the school is it's about writing styles and how people prepare to write. Some people say, I just can't write anything until I've just been reading solidly for 6 months, for example. It's opening, weird, and others don't. You've been brought out. I used to work at IDS, so you have you've got 3 days on this, 2 days on this. It's just a different rhythm and way of having to churn out outputs, and rightly or wrongly, people are trained to write in different ways. But just sharing experience about how you prepare, how you think about. Also, go back to what we were saying just now, the originality, significance, rigour, rather than think about once the paper's done, have that on a little sticky note as you're writing your paper. Am I ticking those boxes as I'm producing this? Is there enough in here that's really rigorous? Have I made sufficient claims about significance? Have I shown the ways in which it's significant and for whom and so on? Thinking about that as you even structure and write up your materials, those sorts of things. So I think it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think you have to sort of target your advice to particular individuals and where they're at and what they perceive blockages to be in terms of reaching higher.
Yeah, well, at Brighton, we were quite astonished to find out that we were top of the table, quality table after the REP 2014. And what we were top of in the HEI sector was the number of staff that have research and scholarship in their contract. So we have 100% of staff. All our staff at Brighton have research and scholarship in their contracts. We do not have any teaching only contracts. Or I don't know what you call them here, fellows, teaching fellows, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not necessarily the table we want to top, but that is going to, will present us with real challenges for the next round, of course, in terms of those number of staff that we're going to have to submit. We have decided as a university, at the moment, not to change that view. And not to try. Some of the universities you might be aware have started to develop teaching only contracts with certain track staff, and we're not going to do that. So we have that, and part of the national agreement, as I'm sure you all know, 20% of your time is supposed to be allocated to research and scholarship. That's 1 day a week. So what we've been working on for people who come to us saying, I've got lots on, I've got loads of teaching, how can I possibly publish, is we've been trying to go back to our workload allocation model. And it sounds terribly, we'll get into union discussions very soon if we don't watch it. We've been trying to work with heads of schools to make sure that workload model does work and to free up that time. It's all we can do. So we have people come to us, quite rightly, saying, I just cannot free that time. That's impossible. And we're saying, well, that's ridiculous. That cannot happen. So we have to talk to heads of schools to make sure that it does. But you could argue that even 1 day a week is not enough to get to write.
No, I think within our school we've now blocked that out, so as you know, about 40% in theory. It's research time. And this is where some of these conversations do start to get tricky, because people who've previously said that I can't possibly because I'm doing so much teaching hours. So you've got the same 40% as everyone else, and it's still not happening. So where do we go from there? That's when the sort of trickier conversations.
Is that just your school that does 40%?
No, it's
It's a nominal institution.
Oh, I wouldn't have it.
Nominal.
No.
That's called research active.
Positive.
But where I used to work at UEA, they were teaching only contracts, and that was a conversation I had to have occasionally with people. And some people, to be honest, were relieved as well. They didn't like the effort, they didn't like the pressure of it, and actually saying, you no longer have to worry, something to publish if you can, if you want to. But essentially, your main role, your main contribution, which is a very important one, is around teaching that. And some people were relieved to go into those sort of contracts, but it's not open that kind of worms now.
Just say before you answer this question, I just want to be clear because I came along just with the proviso to talk about Ref 2021. That's what the topic was. So I don't want people to think that's all I think about all the time. That's what I was asked to talk about. Okay, so that's right. Because you mentioned this, Pete. I mean, I want to be absolutely clear. At Brighton, we have a number of staff, and we're thinking very hard about people who are not likely to be in a ref or will never make it to a ref, and ref is not their focus. And people who are in professional practice are classic people that we have to consider in that situation. So I came answering the question, I hope, but it is much, publication generally is very different for different types of people.
No point to that one.
Oh, yeah, this is a Sussex specific one, but I don't come from an academic background, so I don't have that network or knowledge about how to apply for grants and where to find them. Is there anything that's run by Sussex more centrally about what options are available and how to do it? Because I had AHRC funding for my PhD, but I had a lot of help with my supervisor on how to create that application, and I don't really know how to go about finding, I hear about Leverhulme and British Arts Council and stuff like that, but I don't really know the process or what makes a good application or what the difference is between a successful and an unsuccessful one. So is there anything that the library provides, or professional services, or any sort of centralised support?
There's loads, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, some of it might be school specific, but research and enterprise put on meetings quite frequently. There's things like research professional where you can sort of match your interests to particular calls that are coming up. Do talk to your research director in the school that you're in, and your research leads. They should be able to give you help on that. A lot of schools, including ours, once you're starting to develop an idea, will give you feedback, sort of peer feedback on the proposal, to give you comments about pitch. And there's also Christina Mariatti and others that can help you on the impact side. So if you, I don't know, maybe more discipline specific, but if you have to write pathways to impact type component of the proposal, there's help with that. There's an archive of successful bids that have gone in, so when you're thinking about particular funders, you can see who else has already got a successful bid in with that funder, which is often very helpful. So whoever your director of research is should be able to talk you through all of these things, because at all stages there's quite a lot of support really. People always ask for more, but there is a lot.
Just add to that, all of the above, and only mostly through the doctoral school and with self-development put on regular events. So aside from asking specifically within your own unit, there are things that run regularly in university.
And the library runs a programme of research support through a variety of different interventions, and there's information on the website, the library website. Any other questions or observations on planning for REF 2021 and publications? Anything either of you would like to?
No, I got home when Phil said that Brighton was top of the league. I was thinking, but that was until last night, and you guys were like, people started going. So it was insignificant as REF.
There's something just there.
Yeah, just wondering, you mentioned the issue of having coordinated submission or coordinated effort by senior faculty members when they kind of submit outputs to journals and trying to engage junior colleagues with them and add them the same output. I'm wondering whether such initiative will take place in Sussex as well. By any chance, would that be kind of a university policy? Would that be a departmental policy? this is probably kind of taking the idea from Brighton to Sussex and asking the Sussex seniors here to tell us whether there'll be something similar in place, perhaps.
I think some of those conversations are taking place, and some of those ideas about game playing and matching people and bringing authors, and as you were saying, with international authors to improve citations and demonstrate significance, etc. I know some of those conversations are taking place. It's probably not appropriate to have a policy on it as such, to say, thou shalt do this, but on a sort of case-by-case basis where it's appropriate, giving people, through the personal research plan process and mentoring, giving people advice about how they might want to do that, I think could be useful, and it is happening.
Yeah, I agree with Pete that it needs to be completely appropriate that an author should be an author because they made a
well, of course, I'm not saying there will be gift authorship or any sort of
because it's just as bad to have a junior author.
I mean, the fact is that the mentorship perhaps would probably get translated into some sort of inclusion and direct mentorship. Yeah, that's what.
And that seems to echo what everybody says a university should be, is or should be, of a collegiate environment, and yet sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And just within a unit and across the career stages.
I mean, the problem with ref is whatever ref it turns out to be, it's all about gameplay. And it just depends how serious you want to be about it. You can be collegiate like Ian is, and I hope I am. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of people who are next door neighbours who are not collegiate and are there to gain more money and prestige and league tables. Vice chancellors' salaries have a performance-related payout element to it. Everybody wants to do better. So I like the morals, but at some stage you have to be quite strategic as best you can without pushing it too far. That's maybe I've got a harder edge to it.
I agree in recognising the environment, but equally one should be able to set aside things like ref and recognise the development of individuals.
Absolutely.
That's what a university is about, the educational part of the research.
And even more so for art, actually.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your contributions. Can we thank Phil and Peter for sharing their inspiration and insights with us in the usual way. And finally, just to say that this has been the last seminar in the 2017 series, so I'd like to thank Helen, Beth, Katrina and Don for their input, support and organisation of what's been an inspiring and thought-provoking experience, and that we look forward to their hard work and efforts in arranging the 2018 series. So thank you very much to them as well. Thank you.